Fate. Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 83-84. Chapter 83. Nero Fest. Nero Fest. I'm telling you, we've been going over everything that went on and they just look like they've up and vanished. Romani threw his hands up in defeat, shaking his head. I'm looking around and from what I can see pretty much all of the servants have vanished from Chaldea. He paused, spinning his chair to the side towards those still present, with a couple notable exceptions. Stahl, Leonidas, Ash and Da Vinci all stared back at the doctor as he waved his hand towards them. Da Vinci and Ash I can understand. Romani went on further, then frowned. I can also understand Stahl. His eyes fell onto Leonidas. But how come you're still here? No offense. Leonidas remained silent for a few moments. His arms crossed themselves in front of his chest before he gestured towards Ritska and Olga. If I were to depart, then I would not have been able to oversee their training. He explained as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I would never allow them to neglect their bodies. Olga blinked twice, giving the Spartan a frown. I do not recall ever stating I would attend one of your training sessions, she pointed out. I have far more important concerns. The training of your body is the greatest of concerns, Leonidas bellowed, momentarily jolting the woman at his volume. Even if you are not my master, I cannot allow any ally of mine to be underdeveloped in regards to their physical capabilities. Wah! Olga sputtered, giving the Spartan an indignant glare. I exercise. Leonidas' was nothing but doubtful as his eyes scanned her through the slits in his helmet. The man slowly shook his head. Clearly it is lacking. All the more reason for you to participate in early morning training. He turned to the saber. He is one of my most diligent pupils thus far. Romani blinked at that piece of information, turning his body to face Ash. You are? Ash shrugged. It gave me something to do and keeps me alert. He paused for a few moments. Whether or not my body will ever be capable of improving physically is an entirely different matter. It changes nothing. Leonidas waved his hands. Training is as much a case of focusing the mind as it is about focusing the body. He swung a hand towards Ritska, pointing a finger at the boy and the girl behind him. The training that Verndari put you through has been a most excellent warm-up. However, you have yet to begin the real thing. Ritska's expression paled slightly. He considered Verndari's training to be rather strenuous for him already. The idea of literally being put through a Spartan course was sounding far less appealing than the ancient king made it out to be. We've gotten off track. Olga interrupted, shifting the attention of the group back to her as she tapped her foot on the ground repeatedly. Where are all the servants? She paused before a briefly terrified expression came to her face. Did we lose a generator? If we did, none of us would be able to see each other right now. Da Vinci reassured her as she moved towards the monitors and the operators. What do we actually see right now? Carrie blinked when she realized Da Vinci was addressing her. Oh, right. The woman spun around in her swivel chair to face her screen. Well, I didn't mention it earlier because it was sort of small, but there's a small singularity in Rome. What? Olga exclaimed out in shock before her expression turned thunderous. And you neglected to mention this until now. What possessed you to fail to mention such pertinent information? Are you incompetent? She didn't mention it because it's minuscule. Maxwell spoke up, still looking down at his screen as the director's attention turned on him. To the extent that it will disappear inside of a few days. Like every other minuscule singularity which has been popping up since all of humanity was incinerated. He turned his chair around to face Olga with a perfectly blank expression. But if you wish to be made aware of the hundreds of instances of minute singularities that occur every month, then I will compile a list for you to read, Director. Olga remained silent for a few moments before her shoulders visibly slumped and she straightened herself out. I see, she replied quietly, turning her attention back to Carrie. Why are you mentioning this now? Carrie's eyes darted between Maxwell, who was still giving Olga a very cold expression, and the director herself before she slid her chair back and pointed at the monitor. Well, it only covers Rome and the date is a bit weird to me. She gestured to the numbers. It's taking place only around a month after Fujimaru and Mash came back from the second singularity. She paused for a few moments to let the words sink in, and the only reason that it actually counts as a singularity right now is the fact there is an unusually high density of servant signatures present. Ritsuka furrowed his brows. When you say that, do you mean that the missing servants are in Rome right now? Carrie filled in, then gave a shrug. It's definitely possible, probably the most likely answer. What are they doing there? Ritsuka asked as he scratched the back of his neck and looked around. Actually, how did they get there to begin with? Da Vinci shrugged. Who knows, although given who's missing it's more than likely that someone took them all away. She crossed her arms before resting a single finger on her chin and tapping it repeatedly. Either way, we'll have a clearer picture once you and the director reshift down. Exact what? Olga jerked, spinning to face Da Vinci. What do you mean? I'm not going to. Fujimaru, Mash, Leonidas and Ash are the only servants we actually have right now. Da Vinci explained with a shrug. I'm still needed here and the only reinforcements we actually have available right now are you and Berserker. She gestured towards Stahl, the metal golem remaining perfectly silent as it stood in the corner of the room and seemingly stared at them all. Olga pursed her lips, looking around the room before she exhaled through her nose, turning to look up at her Berserker for a few moments then back towards the Rayshift crew. Get us ready to head down. She pointed at Romani. If you Rayshift us into the air, I swear the things I will unleash upon you will. She trailed off, growling incoherently before she turned on her heel and marched out of the room, Stahl following after her. Ritsuka and Mash watched the two leave before the latter turned towards Romani. She has got a point. Please don't spawn us in the air again. I'm not doing it on purpose, Romani whined. We managed to get you into Orleans correctly, didn't we? Both times, I might add. Ritsuka slowly nodded his head. Yeah, but there's also the other times we just got dropped in. He threw his hand over towards Mash. If this keeps up, Mash is going to get a skydiving skill ranked at A+ or something. Please don't joke about that, Senpai. Mash commented with a nervous expression. Those situations make me very worried for your safety. Yeah, but you're there so it's okay to joke about it. Ritsuka dismissed with a chuckle, turning around and moving towards the exit. Come on guys, we're going back to Rome. Leonidas placed his hands on his hips and nodded his head. Yes, tales of the Roman army are quite fearsome. I would very much like to see the great legions for myself. He paused, then looked at Ritsuka and Mash. Did you fight alongside them? Sort of. Ritsuka shrugged. Roman has that journal of the second singularity in the library. I'm already working on making one for Singularity F, Orleans and Okeanos, the doctor happily cheered out. There we? Ritsuka paused, looking back at Romani. Okeanos? It's what we have the third singularity marked down in the logs. Romani explained, pointing behind him. It's more distinct than calling them Singularity 1, 2 or 3. Huh, Ritsuka blinked, looking to Mash and seeing her similarly surprised expression. Fair enough. I like it. What is Orleans called? 100 Years War of Evil Dragons. Romani replied back. Noticing the odd looks he received, the man's expression turned slightly bashful. What? I like it. Keep up the good work, Roman. Ritsuka nodded to the man with a quirked smile before he swiftly left the room, the other servants following him outside and leaving Romani, Da Vinci and the other operators behind. What's the second singularity called? Munir asked, spinning his chair around with a slightly giddy expression as he stared expectantly at the doctor. The all-consuming empire. Romani replied back, because from what we heard, Saint Aldrich liked to eat people and, you know. Huh. Da Vinci scratched her chin. Very nice. I suppose you might have some essence of creative flair. Her eyes flashed before she stared suspiciously at the doctor. Unless you consulted someone else, perhaps? I told you, Magi Mari is very helpful. A VTuber is naming our reports. Carrie snickered to herself, her head falling into her hands before she soon descended into a fit of giggles as the others in the room expressed similar faces of amusement at the naming conventions. What? Romani whined. They're good names. Magi Mari is an amazing assistant. I can't. Carrie managed to get out in between laughs as she thumped her hand against the desk. It is a fire I can see burning inside you. Leonidas continued to praise as he walked behind Olga. However, it is unfocused. A roaring inferno with no direction, which is why I insist you join me for training. Olga merely huffed in response, shaking her head in dismissal before looking towards Ritska with a frown. Tell him to leave me alone. I'm not seeing the harm though, Ritska replied with a puzzled expression. Is exercise that bad? I am not running marathons in the simulator. Olga growled at him, gesturing to herself. I do casual exercise to keep myself in shape. I am not built for high workout environments. All the more reason for yourself to take part. Leonidas swiftly countered with his ever-positive attitude. To allow this fire to remain uncontrolled is nothing short of neglect. The man went on, shaking his head. I cannot allow such potential to be wasted. Allow it. Olga retorted as they closed in on the doors to the Rayshift chamber. I'm not being put through some grueling exercise like some grunt. She shook her head, then noticed Mash staring at her with a puzzled expression. But, I do the exercise? The shielder replied with a strange tone, before looking to Ritska. Does that mean? Not you, Kyrielite. Olga swiftly cut her off. You're a servant, you're built for that type of environment. Why you're not a grunt? She went on, looking around and noticing the other servants present staring towards her. Grunt work isn't bad or something, it's useful. She went on further when she noticed the stares continue on for longer. Ash just shrugged. Think of my work as you will. He merely replied with his uncaring tone, I just do what is asked of me. Your work is appreciated, Ash. Ritska replied to the saber, looking over his shoulder and giving the servant a half smile. Really, I do appreciate it. You're welcome. Ash replied, his lip twitching up slightly before his expression straightened out once again. Then looked towards Olga. I would also recommend you to at least take part in some of the training. What? Olga sputtered. Why? It is useful for keeping you alive. Ash replied easily, as Leonidas stated. It keeps the mind sharp and prepared for combat. I did not have such a luxury of training as the type that has been granted to Chaldea. Yours was a more on-the-job type, wasn't it? Ritska inferred, grimacing. Painful too, I imagine. At times, Ash admitted, but I did not let that dissuade me for long. His attention returned to the director. Given your previous venture, it would improve your chances of survival. If there ever comes a point where I am within arm's reach of an enemy servant, my ability to run a 1-kilometer marathon is not likely to keep me alive. Olga dryly retorted. My training also raises endurance. Leonidas pointed out, allowing a master to remain active for a much longer period of time in the simulator allows for a flexibility in differing environments from the hottest deserts to the coldest winters. He paused. Given what I have heard of your journeys so far, I assume you will need to be ready for whatever challenges approach you. That's still no reason to include me. On the contrary, Leonidas swiftly rebuked, you are still a master, and if there ever comes a time, such as now, where you are required to take to the battlefield, you will need to be in prime physical fitness to endure. Ritska blinked, looking towards Mash and whispering towards her. It's weird how much sense he's making, but I'm somehow worried about what he'll actually do. It's fine, Senpai. Mash assured him with a calming smile. I'm sure it isn't more strenuous than Verndari-sensei's training. See, you say that, Ritska replied. then pointed over his shoulder with his thumb. But that man is literally the king of Spartans, who are notorious for being battle-hardened warriors. Even I know about them, and I've only just started reading up about history. He pointed out, crossing his arms. I'm worried for my health. Don't worry, senpai. I'll be there with you. Her voice was full of as much reassurance as she could muster, and while Ritsuka had no doubt that Mash would be able to endure the training, he was less confident about himself. Because this singularity seems to be much more stable, there should be no issues with the Rayshift experience. Romani's calm voice echoed around the chamber as he spoke through the intercom. All you need to do is find out if the servants are present there and what managed to kidnap them from Chaldea. Are we sure they got kidnapped? Ritsuka asked aloud, staring up towards the command room window. Because considering who were actually missing, it just feels weird to think you could kidnap all those servants. He could see Romani shrug through the glass. Honestly, it's a mystery to me as well, but that's why you're going. He looked off to the side and towards the other operators as he received nods of affirmation before he turned back to peer down at the ground. All right. We're ready to send you down. Back into the coffin then. Ritsuka muttered to himself as the door slid open. The master frowned as he stepped inside. Was there really no other names available? I wasn't in charge of the naming process. Ritsuka silently looked at Olga as she climbed into her own coffin. The woman paused as she felt eyes on the back of her head and swiftly spun around to see the unasked question of Ritsuka. What? I've only been director here for a few months, I didn't name them either. She hastily defended. Besides, is there some issue? Just seems a little morbid is all. Ritsuka offered in reply. Oh, I suppose you've just got something better to name them, haven't you? She narrowed her eyes at him. The master remained silent for a few moments before replying. What about, time tube, get in the coffin? Yes, ma'am. He murmured, pointedly avoiding the glare she was sending him, which indicated just how close she was to making sure the tube lived up to its namesake. The doors closed behind the pair of them. See? Leonidas victoriously smirked behind his helmet before facing Ash. She has a spirit which needs to be focused. Ash just shrugged in response. She's temperamental, I suppose. I can hear both of you. The director's muffled voice echoed out from her of her coffin, betraying her clear irritation. Good. Then you are now aware of how best to improve. I will be sure to observe you closely. Focus on protecting your master rather than observing me. Ha 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 ha. I can do both with tremendous ease. Should you really be trying to anger the director, Ash-san? Mash asked the saber as she climbed into her own coffin. The blonde man turned to face her with a thoughtful expression for a few moments before he replied. It is a greater mercy to make her aware of her own faults so that she might correct them. He offered, in the long term, it will likely avoid suffering and keep her focused on her duty rather than emotions. His lips thinned as he slowly nodded. It would be best for all involved. Mash remained silent as the coffin lid slid closed, separating her from the servants outside as they all grouped together. I must ask, Leonidas whispered to Ash, looking over his shoulder at the Dragon Slayer armor before back towards the saber. Does the giant not speak? They aren't capable of speaking. Ash replied stoically, crossing his arms and waiting as the Rayshift sequence began in the background. They are suit of armor brought to life by the echoes of a soul, nothing more. Leonidas remained silent for a few moments before he spoke up in a quiet tone of voice. Beg your pardon? He leaned in. You mean, that under the armor, they don't have a body? Yes. The man fell into another silence before he audibly swallowed, slowly looking over his shoulder once again at Stahl with a sudden apprehension. Would that not make them a ghost? Ash frowned in thought. Considering he had never actually met a ghost or wraith, he wouldn't actually know how to classify them. It was an odd thing to be faced with other forms of undeath which did not relate to the curse. I am not sure, he eventually replied with a shrug. I have not given it much thought before now. Leonidas took several steps away from Stahl before rocking on his heels. I see. He muttered, I'll keep my distance, just to be safe. He nodded, his voice cracking slightly at the start of the sentence and drawing an odd look from the saber. He then noticed that Leonidas' posture had tensed up, the man looking ready to bolt at the slightest movement. Starting unsummoned program. The intercom blared out in its usual mechanical voice. Initiating spiritron conversion. Rayshift commencing in 3, 2, 1. The entire group stared in silence at what lay before them, their expressions ranging between bewildered and resigned as they gazed upon the first thing that they noticed, and it was difficult not to, as they manifested themselves in the era. So, Ritska whistled, raising his left hand and pointing towards the object in question, I'm guessing that this is it. Assumedly. Olga replied in an almost dead tone of voice, already gathering who was actually behind this singularity just by taking a single look at what lay before them. Considering it is not technically supposed to even start construction for another 10 years. I was wondering about that, Mash admitted quickly, nodding her head as she stared up towards it. I thought the doctor might have gotten the wrong era. Nope. Romani's voice came through the communicator, right era, and I suppose we've found the cause for the singularity and why it's only limited to Rome right now. A sigh came through, not that big of an issue, but the Colosseum of Rome appearing about 10 years before it's supposed to is a bit strange. Colosseum? Ash asked aloud, looking to Ritska for an explanation. A big stadium. The blank stare persisted, they held games here. Games. Events for the public to enjoy. Leonidas continued on, all manner of physical activities and competitions to discover who was the strongest at a certain sport. The people enjoyed the distraction and it made for suitable training. Distraction? Ash blinked. Did it serve a purpose then? Leonidas hummed for a few moments before he replied, I suppose you could say it did. There was much enjoyment to be had in both participation and watching them. The Colosseum of Rome held the Olympic Games after being restored by Emperor Nero. However, they were less inclined to play fair. The man's voice turned mildly bitter, a rather great insult to those who put in their strongest effort to be recognized as a champion. That aside, Ritska scratched his cheek, looking to the communicator, is that what's happening here? You think someone is hosting the Olympic Games in a Colosseum which technically isn't supposed to exist? Romani asked with a raised eyebrow before his other slowly rose to join its counterpart. Well, that would definitely be a minor glitch in history but enough to warrant a singularity. He hummed, I'm not sure, there must be more going on here than. A roar cut him off, the eyes of every servant turned skyward as a shadow passed over them. The servants all instantly jumping into a position of readiness as the shape became clearer. Wyvern. Mash echoed out, moving to cover Ritska as Ash and Leonidas both flanked either side of her with their weapons drawn. Olga ducked down behind Stahl as the berserker shifted his massive frame to prepare for any attack. The wyvern touched down directly in front of them. Ritska noted that it appeared to be of a different appearance than those he was used to. As well as being marginally bigger, the lizard's scales were sky blue in coloration. Its head was actually relatively small compared to the bulk of its body as it touched down with both of its taloned feet. Then there were the scales themselves which set it apart from the others he had seen. Where the previous wyverns he had seen had scales flattened and joined together like plate armor, this wyvern's scales were sharp and jutted from its body in a row of spikes. Then there was another key difference. This one has a man sitting on its back. Ritska did a double take at the armor. It was nearly identical to the sort which Ash had worn when he was first summoned, the blue fabric and steel plate chest and gauntlets with a T-shaped visor. There was only one difference, where Ash's armor had white fur around the collar and only extended down to his upper arms. This man's fur was a blue to match his fabric and the cape descended down to what looked like his ankles. Resting at his side was a rather large one-sided axe with a long tip descending downwards in a slight curve. The warrior stared at them in silence as he climbed down off the wyvern and onto his feet, crossing his arms as he stared at the group in front of him. "I assume you are the Chaldeans?" he called out. Dead silence permeated for a few moments before Ritska replied, Yeah? Excellent." The man's voice turned pleased as he nodded his head. "You were taking some time to arrive, so I was beginning to get worried you wouldn't show." He sighed, shaking his head. "Goodness knows that the Empress." He paused. "What do you think the correct form of address is?" "Are you talking about Nero?" "Yes." The man nodded his head, uncrossing his arms and placing them on his hips. "It just puzzles me." "I think Emperor," Ritska admitted with a shrug. "It still puzzles me, to be honest." "You as well?" the man murmured, then shrugged. "Either way, now that you're here we can begin." "What are we beginning?" Ritska found himself asking once again, staring at the man. Actually, he pointedly looked at the wyvern and then towards the man. "Are you going to fight us?" "What?" The man jolted in surprise, then looked down at the blue wyvern as it stared at the group in dead silence before he chuckled. "Ah, I see. Perhaps arriving suddenly with Gorm was a surprise." He admitted, then looked back at the group. "No, I am not here to fight. At least not right now." Olga came out from behind stall and crossed her arms. "Then you know what is happening here." She narrowed her eyes. "You mentioned Nero. I assume she is the one responsible for this singularity?" "She did summon a majority of those present." The man nodded his head, then pointed towards the Colosseum, along with the creation of this stadium for the events. Olga growled under her breath, coming to stand next to Ritska. "And the servants from Chaldea?" "They were invited." The man responded casually. "The presence of some was a surprise. The red-haired queen holds great disdain for the environment, but I believe she was convinced to attend by the Katerinan." "Sigward." Ritska nodded his head, chuckling. "Anyway, I'm Fujimaru Ritska." "Mash Kyrielite." "Leonidas." "Ash." Olga remained silent for a few moments before she crossed her arms. "Director Olga Marie Animosphere." The man stared at her in silence for a few moments before slowly nodding his head. "The name of one belonging to a court." He hummed. "I am surprised to see one such as you within this place." Olga jerked in surprise before her eyes narrowed. "What is that supposed to mean?" "At the moment, nothing more than a simple surprise." The man shrugged, then gestured to himself. "I am General Lothian." Then towards the wyvern. "This is Gorm." The drake sent him a flat look at the name before looking away in a huff. Then paused before slowly turning its head towards the Chaldeans. Its eyes narrowed slightly as it looked towards their feet. Ritska and Mash followed the wyvern's gaze until they noticed Fu sat at their feet staring back at the lizard. The two stared at each other in silence for a few moments before the drake let out a small noise and looked away. Lothian stared at the wyvern for a few moments, then looked towards Fu for a few moments and then back at the drake. What was that supposed to be? The wyvern remained silent. "Never mind." Lothian shook his head, turning back to the Chaldeans and gesturing over his shoulder towards the stadium. "The others are already gathering for festivities, and I am admitting I am somewhat impatient for them to begin." "What manner of festivities?" Leonidas asked, lowering his spear as it became obvious that the man meant them no current harm. He looked past him at the stadium. "I find myself curious." "A gathering of great warriors to compete against each other." Lothian replied with a slightly giddy tone of voice. "I am hoping I might find one who can best me in combat." Went on to add, "All the people of Rome have gathered there along with the other servants. They were waiting for your arrival to begin." "Master." Leonidas turned to Ritska. "I say that we should make haste to this competition at once." "What?" Olga narrowed her eyes, turning towards the lancer. "This could just as easily be some trap to lure us into an ambush. Even if it is not, we have better ways to spend our time than frivolously partaking in nonsense." With all the effort that has gone into this gathering, it would be rude of us not to attend in full. Leonidas argued back, looking towards Ritska. Well? Ritska remained silent for a few moments, rolling his jaw as the thought circled around in his head before he slowly nodded. We do need to investigate it anyway. He looked towards the director. It couldn't hurt to see what brought all the servants here, right? Olga grit her teeth before exhaling, pinching the bridge of her nose as she did so. Fine. She grumbled. We will investigate this singularity, but we do so only to put an end to this nonsense. A gathering of differing warriors in one place and you think only how to squander it. Lothian's voice contained nothing but disappointment. How unfortunate that you do not realize this for what it is. He turned towards Leonidas and gave the man what appeared to be an appraising glance behind his helm. You have the mark of a warrior about you. As do you. Leonidas praised the man, staring back at him with a light tone. You called yourself a general? I had the privilege of being a general and a king. Is that so? Lothian rumbled in amusement. Excellent. Perhaps we may face each other on the field of battle? Perhaps we might. Leonidas nodded his head in agreement, to determine the greater warrior between us? Indeed. But I suppose that neither of us have armies to command might take away from our competition. The man pointed out, cupping his helmet chin with his right hand. But you cannot call yourself a warrior general if you are a poorer fighter than those you command. Quite so, quite so. Leonidas gave a pleased laugh, dissipating his spear and striding towards the man with his arm extended. I look forward to our competition. I do as well. Lothian agreed, extending his own arm towards Leonidas, the two clasping each other's forearms in a tight grip. Ash tilted his head as he lowered his weapon, seeing both Mash and Ritska with equally puzzled expressions as to how quickly the new servant had made friends with Leonidas. Ash himself was still struggling to wrap his head around the concept of games. From what they sounded like, it was a form of bettering warriors, and yet they seemed far more pleased than he would have expected. This is one of the fastest friendships I've ever seen. Romani muttered through the communicator. And is no one going to talk about how this man is riding a wyvern into battle? Roman. Ritska looked down at the man with a raised eyebrow. I've seen a god ride into battle on the back of a dragon. A man with a wyvern seems less impressive than that. Good point. Well made. Ritska's eyes were nearly bulged out of their sockets as he looked around, Mash and Olga showing equal levels of awe. The inside of the stadium was crammed full of cheering Romans. The noise was deafening, and yet that didn't take away from what was happening inside the stadium itself. The central arena looked to have been converted into multiple sections, with areas being drawn and painted out by soldiers for different sports and games. Is that a running track? Ritska asked, pointing towards the far end of the stadium where he saw a few soldiers marking out sections of the arena moving around the entire circumference of the stadium. Lothian nodded his head as they moved along. Indeed. Some of the faster servants made a point of contest as to who would win in a race, so the emperor decided to accommodate their wishes. We have games for speed, strength, endurance and skill for all manner of weapons. He came to a halt, turning around to face them. The bigger surprise was the competitors. Some came to watch, others to participate. He looked around for a few moments. If you will excuse me, I have more preparations to see to. The man swiftly took his leave, marking away from them and further into the stadium center as he made ready the final parts of the festival. Really? Ritska looked around the stadium. The servants stuck out like a sore thumb. All manner of different heroic spirits within the stands themselves, all watching down at the arena with different measures of attentiveness. He recognized some of their faces, such as Jean and Martha sitting next to each other. Whoa! It is quite a sight, I will admit. Leonidas agreed with a subdued voice, giving a pleased nod of the head as he looked around, crossing his arms. And to think we shall all compete very soon, I am ecstatic. Olga clicked her tongue, looking around. First we need to find Pale Rose. Biwa. In an odd sense of déjà vu, Olga once again found herself swept off her feet before she could even realize what had happened. The beaming face of Nero suddenly filled her vision as the woman stared down at her. "I am pleased you all arrived," the Emperor exclaimed as she continued to hold the director in her arms bridal style before looking towards Ritska and Mash. "You are just in time. I was worried you would not get my note." Ritska paused. "Note? What note?" Nero blinked. "My note informing you where I had gone and what I was doing," she replied with a puzzled tone of voice. "I left it with the Da Vinci woman to give you." "Huh? You did what now?" Romani blinked, looking over his shoulder towards the inventor. The woman was innocently whistling to herself as she stared off into space. "Really?" It sounded like it would be a good way to forget about recent troubles. Da Vinci admitted with a smile, "I think we could all do with a little friendly competition to take our minds off everything that happened." "I mean, huh? You what?" Olga almost screamed as she craned her head around to glare at Da Vinci. "You knew about this and didn't tell anyone? Why?" "Like I said," Da Vinci shrugged, "I think we could all do with a little relaxation of sorts." Nero gave a pleased noise as she set the director back on her feet and strut past the group, spreading her arms wide and gesturing to the stadium. "Which is why I decided to hold a celebration here, in reward for your service to my empire." She spun around and pointed at Ritska. "I shall also not accept no for an answer." Ritska closed his mouth, giving the emperor a half smile. "As you say, Imperator." Nero blinked at the title before shaking her head. "Call me Nero, as I have said before." She looked around. "So I welcome all of you to these majestic games which bring about spirits from all eras and from different worlds under the spirit of bathing in the glory of Rome." Her smile threatened to split her face. "Welcome to Nero Fest." She actually went and called it that. Romani's sweat dropped. "I'm not even surprised." Neither was Ritska if he was being honest. The master looking around the stadium with his same awe-filled expression as more and more servants started to stand out amongst the Romans, either up in the stadium seats or within the field itself. "How did you even do this?" Ritska found himself asking, turning to Nero with a puzzled expression. The emperor blinked. "Oh, that just relates to what the grand prize of this is," she explained with a wave of the hand. "At the conclusion of the festival, a Holy Grail will be awarded." Wah. Olga's head fell into her hands, the woman letting out a muffled scream before she slowly rose back up. "Are there any other surprises you have for us?" Nero nodded her head with a pleased smile. "Many more. I was not expecting the arrival of so many gods, but it seems even they recognize the magnificence of Rome." She pointed towards the stands. "Even the goddess Diana is here." She trailed off, grimacing slightly, her affliction to my uncle aside. "Another goddess?" Ritska scratched his cheek, looking to Mash. "How many is that now?" Mash frowned for a few moments before looking at Ritska. "Actually, it is possible that the goddess Diana is actually the goddess Artemis." At his look of confusion she elaborated further. "The Roman and Greek pantheons share a great deal of similarities, and it is known that some divine spirits moved from location to location as their own age of gods started to end." "Ooh." Ritska nodded his head in understanding, then turned to Nero. "So, what other gods do you have here?" "I believe there is a goddess of fortune as well. Gwyndolin aided me in setting all this up," Nero went on before Ash cut her off. "Gwyndolin helped you?" The saber raised a single eyebrow. "Why?" Nero blinked at him. "Because I asked for his aid and said that all who assisted Rome would be welcome to the festival," she replied. "After that he agreed and aided me in setting up the stadium so swiftly, as well as some of the equipment you see around you." She pointed towards some of the obstacles and sports equipment around the stadium. "Is that a boxing ring?" Ritska asked as one particular piece of equipment stood out to him. Nero nodded. "We have a great many servants who expressed an interest in that particular sport." Huh, Ritsuka muttered, shaking his head and looking back at the Emperor. So, where is Gwendolyn? Well, it's actually quite cute, isn't it me? Indeed, myself. Steno replied with a coy smirk as she looked at the other two. Look at how pleased his feet are. They wag like tails. Euryale teased as she rested her chin delicately on her hands. Medusalus once again managing to seduce a god. Medusa jolted at the term and looked up towards the two goddess sisters. She muttered in a small voice with a hint of pleading to it. I have done no such thing. Oh. Steno tilted her head, turning to stare at Gwendolyn. So why were you two sat alone when we found you? Because I was unaware you were present, else I would have invited you. Gwendolyn replied, turning his head to look at the two goddesses further down the seating. However, I am relieved to see you are both in high spirits. Oh, look at that, me. Euryale giggled, he's going to use his silver tongue. Indeed he is. Steno smiled, perhaps he thinks of us as easy prey like our little sister. She mused, tapping her chin and tilting her head at Gwendolyn. Well, Gwendolyn. Steno leaned closer to him, what have you to say about our sister? Yes. Euryale smiled wider. What have you to say about her? Much too tall, isn't she? Gwendolyn raised an eyebrow behind his helmet and stared at the rider. I am the shortest in my family, he admitted casually with a shrug. Height has never been a concern for me. Steno and Euryale looked at each other in silence before their faces split into identically teasing grins. Well, Medusa just made a small noise. O little Medusalus, Euryale cooed, shaking her head, caught another god in your coils have you? She cut herself off as her eyes spotted something in the stadium, soon narrowing in a flash of irritation. What is Asterios doing all the way over there? She huffed, crossing her arms, I didn't know he was here. Why is he not sitting with me as a good guardian? Gwendolyn craned his head to where Euryale was looking and promptly pursed his lips. The giant white-haired minotaur was currently sat next to Quelaag, the demon woman's appearance keeping nearly everyone else at arm's length from them as the two seemingly spoke to each other. The minotaur had a content expression on his face as Quelaag continued to speak, gesturing to herself and then towards his horns. Who is that little sneak? Euryale huffed, soon rising to her feet. And where does Asterios get off in thinking to leave my side without telling me? Sister wait, Medusa stood up, then pausing as both Asterios and Quelaag suddenly looked in their direction. Gwendolyn's features paled as he saw Quelaag stare in his direction before her expression warped itself into a sharp smile. He supposed that meant she did remember their last encounter. She never did like not getting the last word in. So he's just around here somewhere, then. Ritsuka surmised, all right. He looked around, so, what now? Now? Nero threw her arms wide. Now we prepare for the festivities to commence. A celebration such as this demands a spectacular opening that shall never be forgotten, and I have fully prepared myself to personally direct the opening act. Well, that sounds nice. Ritsuka slowly nodded his head, then looked at the director. What do you want to do? Olga remained silent as she stared ahead. We shall, she soon trailed off, biting her lip and looking down towards the ground. She understood that in stressful situations it was necessary to get time off, and yet this was as far from what she wanted as could possibly occur. A singularity just so they could waste time better spent elsewhere was the height of resource mismanagement. However, on the other hand, if everyone became overworked, then she knew it would only lead to mistakes. She knew that everyone already despised her. If she cut down this, then that would only give them more reason to hate everything she did. The way I see it, Romani's voice cut through her thoughts. The singularity will resolve itself anyway with or without our being here. We've got nothing currently to look for and still no sign of another singularity which has a drastic impact on history. The man shrugged. Fujimaru-kun has been working hard and this offers a chance to help calm some nerves around here. A bit like a day off perhaps? Olga's expression turned incredulous. You suggest we treat this like a holiday? The contract does state that Chaldean employees are allowed a minimum 8 weeks holiday. The man shrugged. People haven't taken it yet, including you. So this could go towards it, just saying. Olga paused. That could work as an excuse, and yet it still felt as though it was nothing short of incompetence to allow this to continue more than it already had. Her teeth ground themselves together before she exhaled. Unpaid holiday. She settled on, for however long this lasts. She raised her finger and pointed at Romani, for everyone. Romani cracked a faint smile. Yes, director. Now then. Olga sighed out, turning towards Nero and narrowing her eyes. What exactly are your intentions here? Nero's smile was almost blinding. I knew you would understand, Pale Rose. Stop calling me that. This is bizarre. Ash commented, looking around with a confused expression. Very bizarre. It is strange, Leonidas admitted, but she has managed to earn the graces of an emperor. That is something to be commended. He puffed out his chest. Now, may we work towards the great gathering of different spirits in combat. And fortune. And fort. Leonidas paused at the new voice, turning his head to stare down at his side, the others all following suit and seeing a small girl standing next to their group. She had long blonde hair tied up into a ponytail, young features and body equivalent to that of a 12-year-old, and a simple long white gown. What? She looked around in confusion. I thought it was custom for warriors to wish for fortune. She looked towards Ash. That's what people always did when I was around. She noticed that none of the stares were actually towards her face, but over her shoulders. To where her golden feathered wings jutting from her back were. The majestic limbs flexed themselves before she looked towards them and then back at the group with a raised eyebrow. Her glowing golden eyes showing only confusion. Is there something on my wings? Ritska slowly raised his hand. It's more that they exist. Are you an angel? The girl stared at him in surprise for a few moments before she burst into a fit of giggles, shaking her head. An angel pfffff the ha 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 ha. The group remained silent as she continued to laugh. The only one with a smile on her face was Nero as she stared at the girl with an equally amused expression. Ha 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 ha. The girl's laughter slowly died down. No, she denied, her smile vanishing. They didn't have wings nearly as beautiful as mine, she boasted, placing a hand on her chest and puffing it out with pride. Oh okay. I shall introduce myself to you, mortal. She beat her wings, rising into the air until she was floating just above the heads of all the other servants present. I am the goddess of luck, fortune and riches. She beamed, daughter of the goddess Guinevere and god Flan. Throwing her arms wide, she stared down at the group. You may refer to me as Caffrey. She got blank stares in response, causing her expression to falter slightly. Really? She looked around with a slightly broken expression which just made Ritska feel bad. Anyone? Goddess of fortune? She sniffled. I really tried hard with that introduction. Ritska raised his hand. If it makes you feel better, I don't know who the other two names are either. Guinevere, Ash muttered to himself, then gave the girl an odd expression. You are of the old royal family? The girl's expression visibly brightened. Yes. She pointed at Ash. As a reward for recognizing me. She threw something out of her sleeve towards the unkindled. His hand came out and grabbed it before it struck his head. The saber lowered his fist and opened it up to stare down at what she had thrown. His eyes lit up in understanding as he looked back at her. If you will excuse me. Caffrey beat her golden wings, climbing higher into the air. I have more fortune to spread. She cheerfully exclaimed as she vanished off into the sky. What the heck just happened? Ritska found himself asking after a few moments, then looked around. No, seriously. What the heck was that? A goddess of fortune. Ash replied, raising his hand with the item he had been gifted held between his fingers. I can see the resemblance now. Ritska leaned closer to get a better look at what Ash held in his hands. Is that a copper coin? Ash nodded his head, turning it over to show the other side of it. Ritska was able to see the shape of an angel-like figure emboldened on the side. He nodded his head as he understood what Ash meant. Ooh. He hummed, so she has coins? Of a sort. Ash admitted with a shrug, crushing them increases your luck for a short time. Seriously? Ash nodded. Indeed. He pointed down to his bottomless box. I have a great many I kept but never found a use for, as with the less common gold coins. A goddess of luck who makes coins to bring luck. Olga raised an eyebrow, looking off in the direction Caffrey had vanished off to. Certainly a strange habit. She then looked back at the coin, and you just crushed them. She raised an eyebrow. It's a metal coin. How would someone who isn't freakishly strong accomplish that? Ash shrugged. I don't know. Olga rolled her eyes. Of course you don't. We've dawdled too long. Nero cut in, impatiently tapping her foot against the ground. The opening ceremony will begin soon and then the games can start in earnest. Yes. Leonidas nodded his head excitedly. Come, master. He roughly pat Ritska on the shoulder. Let us go. All right. Ritska chuckled, shaking his head and looking towards Mash. This is going to be something, isn't it? Mash was still looking around the stadium before her eyes fell back onto Ritska. Why yes, senpai. She nodded her head. It's just strange to think Nero-san could set this all up so quickly. On the one hand, I'm surprised by how she did it. Ritska admitted, but on the other hand, it's Nero. He replied as if that explained everything. Anyway, I'm really curious as to how this is going to play out. And thus, the madness begins, and yes, 2 new servants. Lothian and Caffrey. As for why I said Caffrey is Guinevere's daughter, well, I just came up with that. Caffrey is the angelic figure on the coins and from what we know of Gertrude, Guinevere's other daughter, she also was described as the heavenly daughter. There's also the feathers in her cage. I just inferred that her daughters have the capacity to exhibit angelic wings. It's just me making up shit, but these new gods have to come from somewhere. She's also a lily servant as well, so there you go. Stats and dialogue time everyone. Caffrey, goddess of fortune. Servant, ruler. Strength, D. Endurance, D. Agility, B. Mana, B. Luck. E. X. Noble phantasm. C++ turn of fortune. C++ anti-unit. Max target. 1. Max range. 1 to 20. Infliction of a curse of poor luck upon a target. It is not so much a curse of poor luck as much as it is a curse of horrendous luck. Anything that can go wrong, often will go wrong. Within a battle, this is downright fatal. To those with a luck stat below the rank of C, they have the possibility of accidentally killing themselves. Those with a high luck stat can find this offset slightly, but it is still dangerous to them. Class skills magic resistance. B. True name discernment, D. Item construction. D. Capable of crafting items which boost the luck of individuals. Divine core of a goddess. X. Despite being a goddess, she is still relatively weak when compared with her counterparts. Personal skills. Miracles. See basic miracles known to a goddess. Blessing of a goddess of luck. I can bestow this blessing upon others to greatly raise their fortune for a brief time, making them more likely to find openings in combat. Golden rule. A. As a goddess of luck herself, her talent for finding treasures is extraordinarily high. Fated with fortune. A++ despite her luck stat being E. She cannot experience anything but good fortune. She is a goddess of fortune and luck herself. To think she could ever encounter a time where her fortune would be poor is impossible. Summoning. Greetings, I am Caffrey. Ruler servant and goddess of fortune, Teehee. I did it. I got a dignified intro ahem. J just ignore that last part. I'll be there to wish you luck in all your endeavors. Dialogue 1. So there's this strange delicacy in the kitchens called ice cream, do you think the Red Archer would mind if I took some? Dialogue 2. I am still a goddess, you know. Just because I look young and actually am young compared to all the other gods doesn't make me a child, does it? Dialogue 3. Master and servant. I think it's more like a lucky charm. Yes, a lucky charm or a supporter. I'm here to cheer you on from the sidelines and make sure you're always finding fortune. Dialogue 4. If you have Gilgamesh, kid, he's unusually lucky, isn't he? He's also got a lot of treasures. I'm a little sad he doesn't need any of my coins, but that's alright. He says I'm not a bad goddess. Dialogue 5. If you have nameless king. There's a god around here who always looks at me from a distance and stares, but I don't feel hostility from him. Like he's quietly watching over me. I'd like to at least speak to him, but he always vanishes when I try to find him. I'll get to him eventually. Dialogue 6. If you have Guinevere. Is that mother over there? It is. Yay. We haven't seen each other since she left. It was a really sudden thing as well. She just got up and vanished with father, but I knew I'd see them again. After all, she wouldn't leave me forever, alright. Dialogue 7. If you have Aldrich, I'm scared. I don't like him. It's scary. Dialogue 8. If you have Gwendolyn, Uncle Gwendolyn, see. He just jumped. He always gets surprised when I hug him. The snake legs? I've got wings, so are snake legs bad? Dialogue 9. If you have child servants. I know I look like a child, but that doesn't mean that, they look like they're having fun, don't they? I wonder if I can join them. Dialogue 10. If you have Philionor, How come Auntie Philionor looks my age? Wait, is that a dragon? Dialogue 11. If you have Atalanta, I'm not sure why, but she keeps treating me a little differently to the other servants around here. I might be a bit younger than the other gods, but I'm still older than her. Dialogue 12. If you have Giles de Rais, Castor. There's this servant who sometimes looks at me very funny. He has big eyes, but it's still weird how nice he is. Why do you look so worried? Likes, well, I'm a goddess of fortune, so I like bringing luck to people. I said luck, not good luck. Hates, dislike. Well, I'm not a big fan of being alone if I'm honest. Also, people who keep cheating fortunes. That's really bad, so don't do it. Wish for the Holy Grail. Wish? I've never really heard about wish granting, if I'm honest. It's very strange. Bond level 1. You have a strange sense of luck about you. It's either really good or really bad. It's sort of funny to be around. Bond level 2. Your luck is still weird, but I'm a goddess of fortune. I would be more than willing to turn it around if you just asked. No? Alright, I'll wait. Bond level 3. You slipped and split ice cream on yourself earlier. Wow, that's really bad luck. Really bad. Bond level 4. Your white shirts got stained pink. More bad luck. Teehee. Bond level 5. Am I responsible for what happened to you? Yes. I said I was a goddess of fortune, which means good and bad, so that's just how I am. Still, I think you're very funny to be around. Don't worry, I'll only give you bad luck when it's funny. Birthday. A birthday? Ho, I think that you are due a lucky surprise, so I'll make a special golden coin for you just for today. During an event. Something's going on outside. I want to have a look, can we? First ascension. I feel a little tingly. Does this mean I'm getting stronger? Second ascension. I've never fought anyone before, so my spells aren't all that powerful, but I'll be there to cheer you on though. Third ascension. You're still going. I'm even in my royal gown, so you must be really invested. I hope you aren't expecting favoritism though. I'm still going to give you good and bad luck. Fourth Ascension. Wow, you really did it, didn't you? Okay. As a goddess of fortune, I'll do my best to make sure you get everything you're due, an investment. Shieldless Lothian Servant. Rider Strength. B Endurance, A+. Agility. C Mana. D Luck. B Noble Phantasm. B Gorm. C+, Anti-Army. Max Target. 50, Max Range. A small blue lightning drake, Lothian encountered and dueled shortly after his retirement. While he fought the drake, he proclaimed it a fearsome beast, not due to its size but its resistance to lightning. The drake also declared him a stubborn idiot but found him mildly amusing. The two battled and Lothian proved victorious. However, he could not bring himself to kill the drake as he had finally found a worthy foe. Stormwhore. B. Anti-Unit. Max Target. 1. Max Range. 1 to 5. The legendary axe of Lothian, made stronger through belief. What was once a common axe is now imbued with the ability to slay dragons. For its other purpose, holding the axe aloft, Lothian can call down lightning onto the blade or onto someone close by. Class Skills. Riding. A+ Magic Resistance. B Personal Skills. Ring of Giants. A+ boosts endurance temporarily. Stone Ring. B chance to greatly increase the weight behind a strike, staggering foes and allowing Lothian to exploit an opening. What appears to be a light swing will actually carry a heavier weight behind the blade. Tactics of the Peasant General. Despite beginning his career as a humble peasant, Lothian quickly cemented himself as a military genius. He excels at catching his opponents by surprise and is equally impressive in defensive operations. Charisma. See Frail Foes. A Lothian went into every fight without a shield of his own and left unvanquished. He is a warrior who can inspire bravery in his allies and terror in his enemies. Summoning. I am Lothian, General of the Army of Forosa. Rider Class Servant. I will serve as your general in these coming wars. Dialogue 1. There is wisdom in waiting, but there is a fine line between waiting and dawdling. I will remind you if that line is ever crossed. Dialogue 2. My time as a general was long indeed, but there was a period where I was much simpler and much more brutal, but that was long ago. Dialogue 3. I serve as your general in these times, that is our relationship. You give me commands which I will ensure are carried out and I will seek to inform you of the best course of action. Dialogue 4. If you have Ermengild, Ivory King. The Knight Ermengild. Yes, I know him well. We fought side by side through many battles even from when Forosa was a country united. That was many years ago. From what I have heard, he has made himself an even greater warrior and a good king. Strange to think I once commanded him, is it not? Dialogue 5. If you have Vengrel. Vengrel of Forosa. Not a name I am familiar with, perhaps it was after my time. Still, the legends I hold in my mind tell me of a ruthless warrior who was little more than a beast on the battlefield. Yet the man I see is of sound mind, one of contenture in the world. I see, a warrior who has found his true calling in a life of peace then. Dialogue 6. If you have Nameless King. You would not find a soul in Forosa who would not recognize their own god. Farum, the war god. That he knows my name is a great honor to me. Still, to think we both ended up taming the dragonkind. Although his is undoubtedly superior to mine. We both know it's true, Gorm. Dialogue 7. If you have Martha. A saint you say and one who tamed a dragon. It seems the art of dragon taming persists no matter which world I walk upon. I can see that glint of a warrior in her eyes. I am curious as to which of us would win if we fought. Dialogue 8. If you have Jeanne d'Arc. A fellow leader who came from the origins of the common man. I am glad to see that we peasants are of great potential. The ability to read? I did not have that for some time. I would be happy to teach you, if it matters so greatly. Dialogue 9. If you have Leonidas, aha. A warrior king is it? Excellent. I look forward to a duel between us. I hope he is skilled indeed. Dialogue 10. If you have Hector, an old man, he says, yet those simple movements of his pack such lethal force. I would wish to fight him indeed. Perhaps if I had encountered such a man in life I would have found peace. Dialogue 11. If you have Achilles, a man who would fight and could never be bested. Yes, I was like that boy when I was young as well, much too like him. I had no blessings of the gods nor unbreakable skin, but I was always the best warrior on the battlefield. There comes a point where a true warrior craves challenge rather than victory. Dialogue 12. If you have Iskander, his talent as a general is superb. Perhaps we should sit down and play one of those strategy games, King of Conquerors. Dialogue 13. If you have Dobryny and Nikitich, so, we both ride wyverns and wield axes. Is this what they call plagiarism? Can we at least compete over it? Yours isn't even an actual wyvern, they're a horse. Dialogue 14. If you have Scathach, that woman, her skill is astounding. I wonder, would you be willing to meet me in the simulator for a fight? You would? Excellent. I have a good feeling about this combatant, master. Dialogue 15. If you have Mordred, Knight Crimson Lightning, there you are. Come, we have another training session to go through. Huh? Bothersome old man? If that is true, it makes you a troublesome little brat, does it not? Did you just kick your sword at me? Likes. I enjoy a challenge. When I was alive, I fought battle after battle, but every foe I faced was much too weak. Eventually, battle lost its enjoyment. There was nothing to be said about a fight you enter with the knowledge you'll win. Hates, what do I hate? If you are to deploy me, please do so in a battle which will challenge me. I have faced enough frail foes in my life. Wish for the Holy Grail? A wish? I'd wish for the opportunity to face a true dragon. Gorm is special, but he is but a wyvern and I still bested him. No, I want to fight a true dragon and beat them or die in the attempt. Bond level 1. These fights you have given me, they are too easy. I would ask you to give me more powerful foes. Bond level 2. Our foes are growing in strength. This is wonderful. I probably shouldn't get carried away like in my youth, but to be challenged is just, I'll temper my aggression. Bond level 3. You keep finding strong foes for me to face. I am thankful for this, truly I am. Gorm appreciates it as well, don't you Gorm? Oi, don't zap me, you overgrown eel. Bond level 4. As you have done me a good service, I shall do you a good service as well. I will serve as a general in your growing army. You don't have an army? Forgive me for being blunt, but I am certain you do. Bond level 5. I've heard of these strategy games, do you want to play some? Birthday, your birthday? Let's go for a drink. Too young? Nonsense, come. During an event, some manner of competition? Let us depart then. First ascension. You have made me stronger. I only hope that you find opponents to match this strength of mine. Second ascension, again. You give me more strength. This is rather dubious, and yet you have not disappointed me. Very well, continue to give me strength as you please. Third ascension. I suppose we are fortunate enough that our foes warrant this strength you give me, again and again. Although, I am fearful of there being such a thing as too strong. Fourth ascension. I will get no stronger than this. It is, oddly relieving in a way. To think I have reached my peak, and yet I am burdened with the thought that my foes are now too weak to face me. I trust in you to find me worthy combatants. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 84. Nero Fest. 2 Nero Fest. 2. How I managed to let myself be convinced to come here is beyond me. Boudica grumbled to herself, turning to look over her shoulder at the man behind her and stabbing an accusing finger in his direction. Do you have a charisma skill I am not aware of? It is only at rank E. Sigurd replied earnestly, giving the rider a friendly smile as he continued to bake away at his food stall, the pair having set one up near the entrance of the Colosseum for the guests to partake in baked goods and drink for the sporting events. To be honest, I think it's much too high. That sounds about right, the rider muttered to herself, shaking her head as she went back to baking. How do you even manage this? Inviting me to Rome of all places? I invited you only to enjoy in merriment. Sigurd moved past her carrying a tray of pretzels, giving the woman a reassuring smile and a light pat on the shoulder. If it is truly such a burden to be here, I will not prohibit your leave. Boudica remained silent for a few moments before sighing, her shoulders visibly slumping before she gave Sigurd a tired smile. You're much too earnest for your own good, you know that, right? I have been told that I am, on occasion, a man with a heart too big. Sigurd wryly admitted as he resumed stacking up the display for the customers, and that was by a giant of all things. He added on with a boisterous laugh to follow suit. The man's good humor soon spread onto the Iceni woman and she couldn't help her lips quirking into a smile of her own at his demeanor. Really, she mused, shaking her head at the man, you must have left them with quite the impression. Oh, Sigurd rumbled, pursing his lips, I'd say we rubbed off on each other. He remarked with a warm tone, I actually used to be reckless in my youth. Boudica almost laughed, you. She looked the man up and down with an incredulous expression, really? Oh, yes. Sigurd nodded his head, always rushing into trouble and Yorm would come and bail me out just as swiftly. That was actually the first time we met. He spoke with a nostalgic tone. I believe I was rushing off to help a small village with a problem with the wildlife and all of a sudden I found myself beset upon by a burning demon. He exclaimed. Now I tried to talk some sense into him but he just wouldn't have any of it. The fellow was more interested in violence and naturally we came to blows. He blew air out of his mouth as he shook his head. He almost got me a few times and suddenly a big shadow falls over both of us. He trailed off, looking out of the corner of his eye to see Boudica staring at him with an amused smile. Well, she urged him on, don't leave me in suspense now. Sigurd gave a warm smile. Well, myself and the demon both stop fighting and look up and what do we both see? He paused, a giant. Yorm had apparently been woken up by our ruckus and came down to see what all the bother was about. He shook his head, he was nearly twice the height of the demon and it just spins on its legs and waddles away as fast as it can. Boudica chuckled, her mind already concocting images of Sigurd and some burning monster staring up at a freshly awoken giant. I suppose he wasn't pleased to have been woken up. Goodness me, no, Sigurd shook his head. He takes one look at the fleeing demon and then another at me before he says, what the bloody hell was that about? He put on a deep tone as he did so before he relaxed. After I explained it he just up and said that if my size was equal to my foolery, then I would dwarf even him. Ha ha ha. Boudica gave a light chuckle, holding her hand in front of her mouth as she stared at the night. Really? That's certainly an impression. Most certainly. Sigurd nodded along. Still, I suppose we were a pair of fools by the end of it. He gave an amused huff before looking down at the makeshift oven they had set up. Now then, I believe we have more baked goods to make, do we not? Boudica hummed, staring at the oven and then towards the crowd with a blank expression. She had briefly considered spitting in the food but that would have been disrespectful to Sigurd's efforts and there was no sense in troubling him with her own problems towards Rome. She blinked when she noticed her environment darkened. The woman poked her head out from the umbrella of the stall and looked out amongst the street to see the problem. Both her eyebrows rose up as far as they could go as she stared at the dragon just sitting in the middle of the street staring towards her. The beast was huge, somewhat skinny and covered in dark blue feathers. The more she stared, the more she noticed that it had no front limbs, instead having 4 wings which curled up at its side as its beaked head looked around for a few moments then back towards her. She continued to watch as one of the largest men, still a little shorter than Heracles, climbed down off its back and onto the street. The man, dressed in dark gray scaled armor and with long strips of equally gray cloth hanging around him, turned to face her before breaking into a steady march for the stall. She watched as he easily closed the distance in but a few steps. His eyes were a gentle golden yet slightly dulled, however the rest of his face was hidden behind a scarf around his neck. The giant came to a stop in front of their stall before he leaned down slightly to actually get a good look at their food. Pret, Zell, he spoke in a slightly unsure tone before looking past Boudica and raising a lone eyebrow. You are a man of many talents, Katarinen. Sigurd looked up, then blinked twice. Oh, God Farum, he exclaimed in a jolly tone as he moved to the front of the stall. I wasn't expecting you to be here. I wasn't planning on attending, Farum replied casually, Boudica wrapping her head around what Sigurd had just revealed, and yet it wasn't as shocking as she was imagining it to be, as he nodded to the shorter man. But I felt the presence of other warriors and he shrugged, well, it seemed as though it would be worth viewing the abilities of the others of this world to some extent. He paused as he looked over his shoulder. And I can sense Gwyndolin here, along with a few others of the Lordkin. He sighed, while I will not attempt to right a wrong after so many years, I will at least assure myself he is in good health. Sigurd nodded his head, I see. Well, as for his health, from what little I have heard, he and Medusa have been regularly seen in the library for a few days now. He shrugged, they appear to be in good company. Farum raised an eyebrow, Medusa? His eyes colored themselves in confusion. I am not familiar with the name. I assume they are a lord of this world? She is, or was anyway. Boudica informed him before she could help herself. Farum's eyes turned to her and narrowed slightly in curiosity. I am, Boudica, she paused. I haven't interacted with all that many gods before, so I'm not sure how to address you. Farum waved his hand dismissively. I care more about strength of arm than race of birth. He looked down at the pretzels. Are they some form of baked treat then? Oh, yes. Sigurd nodded. Do you wish to have one? I'll take 3. He replied. I found 2 other dragon riders. One from the land I blessed. And I wish to entreat with them. He chuckled, then paused. Although the saint seems ill at ease around us. Really? Sigurd blinked, then shrugged. I'm sure a gift of food will bring all troubles to rest. He assured God as he wrapped up the baked goods in brown paper and handed them to him. I wish you luck, however. Farum gave a hum as he took the bag of pretzels and made his way back over to Storm. The dragon was still patiently waiting for him as he returned. The beast slowly stared at the bag in his hand and then towards him expectantly. Farum gave him a flat look. Really? Storm gave a low growl. If I were to attempt to satisfy your hunger, we would be here until you consumed their entire pantry. He pointed out, throwing a thumb over his shoulder at the stall. You're not getting one. Storm gave a mewl in response. Farum gave him a troubled expression before he eventually sighed. Opening up the bag, he pulled out one of the pretzels and split it in half. You can have half of mine and no more, understand? Storm seemed to consider the deal for a few moments before nodding his head, opening up their beaked mouth as Farum tossed the half of the pretzel into the maw. The jaws swiftly snapped shut as they consumed the treat in a single gulp. Honestly, Farum grumbled to himself as he climbed atop the back of the content dragon. With how often I end up following your whims, I wonder which of us was actually tamed by which. Storm gave a huff of amusement as he spread his 4 wings wide,
Giving a single flap, he pushed himself off the ground in a buffet of wind which had Boudica and Sigurd cover their eyes to avoid dust getting into them as the dragon took off into the sky. The rider and Saber watched the god depart with blank expressions before they looked at each other. "So, how did you know him?" she asked, pointing up at the disappearing god. "Another friend of yours?" Sigurd's lips thinned. "I actually tackled him off his dragon in the middle of the air." "You know what? I think your giant friend was right all along." Boudica gave a deciding nod of the head. "If your foolishness did decide your height, you'd be the second biggest servant in Chaldea." "Oh, who would be the fur?" He paused, giving her a wry smile. "Ah, never mind. There could never be any place for you aside from right here," Nero exclaimed as she pushed open the doors to the VIP seating arrangement for the stadium. The others trudged into the section and looked around for a few moments. The seating when compared to the other parts of the Colosseum was incomparable. Ritska swallowed audibly as he stared at the chairs and the array of food. "This isn't a bother, is it?" "Not at all." Nero shook her head as she continued onwards. "Besides, there are others who have been waiting here as well." "Others?" Ritska raised an eyebrow. "What oath?" "I welcome thee." The calm and familiar voice of Cecilia called out from ahead of them. The masked woman turned to face them with a faint smile upon her lips. "My lord." "Cecilia." Ash nodded back to her with a slight twitch on his face before he quickly frowned and looked towards Nero. "You." Nero tilted her head at him in confusion. "Is there an issue?" Ash's expression tightened as he looked back at Cecilia before shaking his head. "No, not for the time being," he admitted, walking towards the firekeeper. "You are well?" "As well as one can be, my lord," Cecilia calmly answered. She stared at him for a little bit longer. "Thou art, well?" "I am uninjured," he replied as he came to a halt next to her, staring at the seat just to her right and placing himself down. "You are being treated well?" "I have suffered no ill harm nor ill intent," she replied with an almost toneless voice, placing both her hands on her lap as she looked at the saber. "Thy concern is unnecessary. The Emperor has proven herself a most gracious host." UMU. Nero nodded her head as she almost skipped towards the two. "Cecilia has been informing me that my living self gifted her the name." She leaned back and placed her hand on her forehead in a pose. "Truly, my creativity is something which spans the distance between life and death." Ash stared blankly at her, then looked over his shoulder to see that Ritska, Mash and the others were looking at him with blank expressions. "Is there some issue?" "Nope," Ritska quickly answered, shaking his head and walking towards another empty seat. "It's just that." He trailed off as he stared down at the stands. He blinked twice before rubbing his eyes and gawking. "Hey, Mash." "Yes, senpai? Is that a rat on a throne down there or am I seeing things?" Mash blinked, swiftly clearing the distance and looking down to see where Ritska was pointing. The girl did a double take as everyone else soon joined her, including Nero, in staring in complete surprise at the rat, around the size of a dog, currently sat upon a small throne carved of what looked like polished marble. Nero-san. Nero looked similarly dumbstruck. "I do not know," she offered a way of a shrug, then looked back down. "Who is that sitting with them?" Ritska squinted. "Well, the one on the right is Gareth and that other is Verndari. There's Marie and Deanne and..." He stared at the final figure. "She looks like you in a blue dress?" "Thou art a most vain and ostentatious human." Marie blinked at the first words from the mouth of the large rat. She wasn't sure whether she should be caught off guard by the words or who they were coming from. "I see thy dress and understand the nature of thy person," the rat went on, turning his head to stare at her fully. The creature hummed, tilting his head, "And yet thy face is that of a babe. Such innocent consternation I see in thine eyes."
Perhaps thou art of childish wit to match thy features. Marie looked at Diane in confusion. The knight was frowning at the rat. Was there a need to insult her majesty such as that? They asked, frowning at the rat. The creature looked towards them. I see thee as well. The rat spoke in its ever-cool voice. Thy nature is that of loyalty. Wouldst thee honor a pledge thee swearest truly? Diane gave a solid nod of her head. I am ever a knight to my master. The rat stared at them in silence before giving an approving hum. I see. Then thou art of the humans I do not detest. He relaxed into his throne before turning to the blonde woman to his left. Didst thou find my actions cruel? The woman remained silent before she shook her head. No. I was curious, however I understand that you wished to see who you would treat with. She turned away and looked down towards the others. You value honor greatly. A ghost of a smile touched upon her face before it just as swiftly vanished. That is something I approve of. If thou speakest truly, then thou art a human cut of a different cloth. The rat gave a slow nod of the head, looking past her to the two knights. These are thy servants. My knight, Sir Gareth. The woman pointed towards the girl, who stood up a little straighter before she pointed past the lancer at Looking-Glass Knight. The other is not one of my knights, and yet I find them in the company of one of the Round Table. She paused. I am left to assume then, that you are one of chivalric spirit. I am Esser Verndari, your lordship. Verndari bowed her head at the woman. Given the manner in which Sir Gareth has treated you with the utmost respect, I assume you are King Arthur. I am. Arthur nodded back, then paused. Is there some issue? She asked, staring at Gareth as the girl fidgeted on the spot. Well, it's just. She looked around nervously before she could no longer contain herself. Even if you're a woman, you'll always be my king, she blurted out, stunning Arthur for a few moments before her expression softened ever so slightly. I see, she nodded at Gareth. That you feel me deserving of such a pledge is gratifying. She looked towards Verndari. You need not feel compelled to treat me any differently than the servants present here. For ease, you may refer to me as Artoria. With respect, your lordship. Verndari fidgeted slightly. I do not believe that I could allow myself to speak with a king so casually. They looked past Artoria at the rat. You speak boldly and yet your tone is one of regality. You are noble. They asked in a puzzled tone of voice. It surprises me little that humans have forgotten our existence. The rat responded in a slightly bitter voice before straightening himself out, sitting up on his hind legs. I am the king of all who reside in the underworld, from every lowly rat to the grim. He answered, my name is unpronounceable in thy human tongue. Thou mayest refer to me simply as the Rat King. Marie was still staring at them in silence for a few moments before she replied. I am Marie Antoinette, Queen of France. She introduced with a slight curtsy, and this is my loyal knight, Chevalier Diane. Diane bowed in greeting. A gathering of human chieftains. The Rat King muttered as he returned to his 4 feet. I find myself dubious. Yet I shall extend thee all a great courtesy for entreating with me at all. He admitted, his tone shifting. I still smell thy confusion. Sorry, Marie admitted. It's just, you know, she looked around, you're a rat. And thou art human. The rodent replied just as swiftly, whatever puzzlement thou hast for my title of king, imagine mine own puzzlement for how humans might decide upon a monarch themselves. A rather stunned silence soon followed as the others weren't exactly sure how they were supposed to respond to that. It seemed odd to see a rat declare himself a king, and yet they had to admit that for a rat, to see a human declare themselves a monarch might be equally odd. I told you she'd be here. The queen blinked at the familiar voice, turning around and her expression visibly brightening at the sight of Mozart and Sanson moving through the crowd towards them. The latter looking more as though he was being dragged along judging by his reluctant expression. You said she might be here. Sanson muttered under his breath, then looked over his shoulder. I did not hear incorrectly, did I? You did not. Archon dutifully replied from behind the executioner as he walked behind them. He had no direction in mind and has seen fit to just wander aimlessly in the vain hope that he would inevitably encounter the monarch. Mozart dismissively waved his hand at the pair. You cannot prove that I was incorrect since we have found her, and he trailed off, his expression going blank as he looked past Marie and the others to the rat sitting upon a small throne. Rather comically, the throne was also sat upon the benches, giving the general appearance of a child sitting on a booster seat. Maria. Mozart gave the queen a strained smile. While I am aware you love everyone, does it really have to include sewer animals? Before Marie could even offer a retort, the Rat King gave a disdainful snort of his own. Thy words are but hollow sounds, spare us thy baseness and prejudice. He slowly turned to stare at Mozart before his eyes narrowed. I see thee for what thou art, filthy human. A base creature guided by thy instincts like that of a rabid beast. If thou art to remain in mine sight, thee will remain silent. Sanson blinked, looking over his shoulder and sparing a surprised glance at Archon before looking back at the rat. Are we intruding? The rat's eyes fell upon the pair of them, narrowing slightly as it stared at the two of them for a few moments, eyes shifting from Sanson and then to Archon before returning to the executioner. I see thee, human. The snout frowned, then looked down to see Marie giving him a somewhat pleading expression. Very well, I shall allow thy presence provided thee doth not disturb the peace. Sanson gave a grateful nod of the head before sitting himself down a respectful distance from Marie. Archon remained standing as he stared at the rat for a few moments longer. Does mine presence surprise thee, Lordkin? The Rat King turned his eyes on the Silver Knight, or has thee turned to thy true nature? He accused, I can smell its stench upon thee, that accursed grasp of the old chaos. Archon stilled. You should keep your observations to yourself, rat. The knight growled back, and remember that I have one king, it is not you. Then there is perhaps some honor within thee after all. The Rat King looked away. Perhaps if thee remembers thy duty clear, thou may remain true to thyself. Archon grunted in response, sitting himself down upon the bench next to Sanson and crossing his arms in front of him. Mozart remained standing, still staring ahead of himself in shock at the fact a rat had insulted him to his face. Well, the man cleared his throat, giving a smile which all but screamed trouble as he stared at the rat. Marie instantly recognized it and widened her eyes in alarm. Vous n'avez pas de mer de grignoter. Marie's eyes nearly bulged out of their socket before she turned to the Rat King. The fortunate news was that they were all destined to speak Latin upon the moment of their summoning, so it was unlikely they were going to. Tu es trop d'estime de toi, humain. Il n'y a presque pas de viande sur toi. The Rat King replied without so much as blinking as they stared ahead of themselves. Marie's head fell into her hands. Merde, Sanson muttered under his breath, pinching the bridge of his nose and shaking his head while Mozart just frowned. Well, a bilingual vermin. Now I've seen everything. Thy words are mine own, human. The Rat King glanced at him. For that is how I feel upon this very moment. Is it, like, foo? Ritska asked, looking down at the fluffy white animal at his feet. Fu looked up at him as if offended by the remark. What? He shrugged at the companion. The only other animals we've encountered have been a wolf and 2 dragons. He replied. I mean like a companion or something. Fu continued to stare at him for a few moments before shaking his head and waddling away from the master. Ritska's shoulders slumped. I feel like I just offended him. I'm sure Fu-san isn't too worried by it, senpai. Mash reassured him, placing a hand on his shoulder before releasing him. Although, maybe it was asking if he was like a rat, she ventured a guess, giving the rat another passing glance before looking back towards Ritska. Maybe? I don't know. Ritska sighed, moving towards his own seat. Already got a wolf as a servant, so why not a rat, I guess. He shrugged as he gently sat himself down. So how are we beginning this? In but a few moments, Nero proclaimed as she strode forwards, I intend to address my Roman citizens and welcome one and all to Eli Chan's debut concert. A voice rang out from the center of the stadium. Nero's expression froze with her eyes shrinking into slits. I'm so excited to be performing at this venue and with so many adoring fans waiting for me. Wah! Nero spluttered as she rushed towards the balcony overlooking the Colosseum. The man almost glared at the figure in the center of the arena. Dressed in a frilly dress with long pink hair. That how? Nero shouted out in shock. How did she get here? Who gave her that podium? What possessed you to help her move a podium into the center of the arena? Martha asked as she took the pretzel from Ferrum, giving him a grateful smile before he handed over the other one to Lothian. I recognized her as a dragonkin. Ferrum explained. She said she wished to entertain the masses and Storm was insistent that I at least help her. He paused. Also, I have never heard of an idol girl before. But the young hatchling was insistent that it was important. Lothian took the pretzel from Ferrum, removing his helmet and revealing his stern features to the world. Untouched skin with short black hair and hazel-colored eyes. Really? He took a single bite of the pretzel and pointed towards the direction of the balcony. She seems ill at ease. Don't talk with your mouth full. Martha chided the man instantly, giving him a minor frown before she looked down at her pretzel, splitting it in half and gifting the other portion to Jean. Her fellow saint gave her a grateful smile as she took the baked treat from her. More importantly, Jean looked up at Ferrum and tilted her head. You said your mount was insistent on hearing her? Yes. Ferrum nodded his head, crossing his arms and leaning back into his seat. Storm is rare to insist upon much, so I agreed. He shrugged, his lip quirking behind his scarf. Besides, seeing a dragon pursue something beyond transcendence was unexpected. He paused, unless she means idolatry in a fashion of worship. Is she going to try and convert us? Lothian suddenly asked, swallowing his latest mouthful and spilling a few crumbs on himself. Is she going to give a sermon of some sort? She said it was her debut, perhaps a recent religion? I do not believe she means that sort of idol. Jean remarked to Lothian, the man blinking at her and tilting his head in confusion. I believe it is something of the most recent era, some manner of popularity contest? Popularity contest? Ferrum's eyes scrunched up with confusion, looking back towards Elizabeth. Really? Wait a second here. Martha then looked at the god strangely. You said you helped move the podium, didn't you? I did. Ferrum nodded his head in response. Why? Then, who built all those speakers? Never heard of speakers before, and until today, I didn't think I'd have made anything to make sounds louder. Pharaohs muttered under her breath as she crossed her arms in front of herself, giving a proud smile. Thanks for doing all the heavy lifting, by the way. Peeved. CU waved his hand, piece of piss. He dismissed easily before he paused, squinting up at the sky. Is that a kid with wings? Huh? Pharaohs looked up in surprise, then took a single step backwards as she small girl crashed into the ground in front of them. The pair stared at her with obvious surprise as she looked between the two of them for a few moments before her eyes landed on CU and her face scrunched up in discomfort. I knew it, she exclaimed, pointing at the lancer. I knew something was wrong around here. CU blinked, pointing at himself. What are yo? Take this and crush it, quickly. The girl didn't wait for him to finish whatever he was saying before she virtually thrust a gold coin into his hands. The lancer stared at golden coin with a dumbfounded expression for a few moments before he looked towards the girl again. What the foo? No time to talk. The girl hastily stammered as she beat her wings and shot off into the sky. I need to make sure people don't get killed, she explained as she disappeared into the distance.
Siyu watched her with his expression still in a mixture of shock and surprise before he stared at the golden coin once again. "You gonna break that?" Pharaohs asked as she looked at the coin in a passing manner before back at the Lancer. Siyu gave her an odd look. "Some random goddess drops out the sky and thrusts a coin into my hand and tells me to break it?" He snorted and shook his head, throwing it away from him. "No, was in all hell am I doing something as stupid as that?" Pharaohs shrugged. "All right then," she remarked, scratching her cheek and staring ahead of herself towards the girl. "Does she have a tail, or is it just me?" "Huh?" Siyu blinked, then looked towards the center of the stadium. "Oh fuck." He'd agreed to help out without actually asking for who they were helping to begin with. The moment he actually saw the girl in question setting up all those speakers ready to start singing, he was instantly aware of what the problem was. "Where did I throw that coin?" he asked, looking around in a sudden worry. "Is that not the girl from Orleans?" Ash asked as he stared down at her with a raised eyebrow. "I did not realize she was also present, and she called this a what?" "A concert." Ritsuka replied, tilting his head and giving a thoughtful hum. "Actually, now that I look at her, is she still going for that pop idol look?" "Ah yes." Ash nodded. "The idolatry that is not idolatry. It is a pitiful display from a bat." The pair blinked at the sudden voice, both turning to see Kiyohime frowning down at the girl. As much as she might try, it's not going to work out all that well. "When did she get here?" Leonidas asked suddenly, looking around in confusion. "I did not sense her." "Me neither." Mash added in surprise. "She just appeared." "It is no surprise," Kiyohime dutifully replied with a smug expression. "It is only natural for me to be present where my Anshin-sama is." "I see." Leonidas nodded his head, pretending he understood a word of what was just said before he picked upon another topic she mentioned. "To what do you refer when you claim her goal will remain unmet?" "It's through no fault of her own," Kiyohime admitted with a shrug as she looked towards everyone else, "but she has a tendency to tap into her draconic blood when she sings." The girl explained. Seeing the blank stares she got in response, she gestured towards her ears. "It is why I would advise all you to cover your hearing." Her eyes fell on Ritsuka, "Especially you, Anshin-sama." She pressured, "I would hate to see you hurt because of the reptile's lack of control." "Draconic blood?" Leonidas frowned, cupping his chin and giving a thoughtful hum as he studied the words. "Is that some form of issue for us?" "You say there might be some damage?" Olga instead asked, looking towards the berserker with clear suspicion. Even if she were to access her dragon blood, there was no indication she had a dragon core within her to possibly do anything to harm us. "Perhaps before," Kiyohime admitted, then pointed down towards the stadium. "But she now has those." Her finger rested upon the speakers. "Wait a second." Mozart frowned as he stared down at Idol Girl as she finished the last of her preparations. "Isn't that?" His eyes widened in recognition before they settled into horror. "Oh God!" he exclaimed, pointing towards Elizabeth. "Someone stop her." "Stop her?" Sanson gave the man an incredulous look. "And what do you mean by that? She is making an attempt at?" "She can't sing," Mozart blurted out in response, turning to look at the others with a panicked expression. "It's not just that she can't sing, it's that she is downright horrible at it. So either stop her or cover your ears." He ducked down low, placing his hands at the side of his head and bracing himself. Archon stared at the man in dead silence before he turned back to look at the girl. His eyes narrowed behind his helmet. "Does she have a tail?" "'Tis no surprise." The Rat King responded casually. "I smell the scent of old sky beasts upon her. The life of dragons courses through her blood." Archon frowned. "Dragons, again?" he muttered, slowly standing up with his hand grasping at nothing. "Why are they everywhere?" Dian gave the man an odd look. "What are you doing?" "I am bound to eradicate the enemies of the royalty." Archon dutifully responded. "Demons and dragons are the greatest foes my king faces.
Therefore it is my charge to combat them in any form they take. And you're going to rush her here? Sanson blinked at him. In the middle of the stadium?
Do you think I would be prevented? I would make the effort to prevent you. Artoria sternly replied from where she was sat. This is a place of gathering and combat has yet to begin. Do not disgrace yourself by halting the festivities on old hatred. Archon grimaced behind his helm. For now, I suppose. He slumped his shoulders, sitting back down, and she appears to be some manner of crossbreed. He paused as he stared at something pushing its way through the crowds below them, his eyes promptly widening. Is that Bishop Havel? He blurted out, watching as the stone-armored man shoved his way through the crowd as he made his way towards the center of the Colosseum.
The other servants all peered down at the giant of a man and promptly exchanged baffled looks. What is he? Gareth's eyes widened. Oh, no, she jumped to her feet, not again. Shit. Verndari was swiftly behind her as the pair jumped over the seats and gave chase after the man, already aware of what he was intending to do.
Lucky, coin, Cu muttered to himself as he continued to look around the ground for it. He didn't think something as glaring as a gold coin could get lost so easily, but apparently it could. The issue was that he was probably moments away from being deafened by the damn dragon girls, singing.
He'd heard it once when it wasn't even aimed at him, and that was bad enough. He dare not imagine what it sounded like through speakers.
The Lancer continued to scan the sand-covered floor as he attempted to find the coin, his eyes occasionally darting up to where the girl was already talking in a deep breath to prepare herself to start singing. Red eyes widened in horror before he redoubled his efforts to find the coin, which was starting to get to him as he felt sweat build up on his brow. At this point he was starting to resolve himself to just covering his ears and hoping for the best. Whether or not that would actually work was something else entirely. Something caught his attention out of the corner of his eyes. He saw the shine of sunlight reflecting through the sands towards his direction. The Lancer virtually disappeared in a blur of movement as he dived on top of the coin, sliding along the ground and raising his hand up to reveal his prize. The man let out a sigh of relief before he prepared to crush it in his hands.
The way he saw it, getting cursed by some flying goddess might be preferable compared to whatever was going to happen with the girls singing.
That was when he heard a ruckus kicking up above his head. The Lancer frowned as he looked skywards towards the stands where the people sat. He couldn't get quite a good look because he was currently lying down on the ground, but the sound of raised voices was plain as day.
Of course, the raised voices only got louder and louder, which served only to intensify the Lancer's confusion, before his eyes nearly bulged out of his sockets. The form of Havel being tackled over the railings by Verndari while Gareth was latched on his back like some kind of accessory was hardly what he was expecting to see. Then he noticed one very key detail.
He was directly underneath them. She. The words barely formed on his lips before the trio crashed on top of him, the combined weight kicking up a huge explosion of sand which obscured their forms for a few moments. When the dust finally settled, the four servants were all lying on the ground in a hastily made dogpile with Cu being at the bottom.
The Lancer grumbled to himself as he looked at himself, grimacing in pain at the colossal weight of the stone berserker currently lying on his chest. He supposed that he was actually lucky, considering that he would have expected some injuries a bit worse than a sore chest at the moment. Red eyes flicked to the side, then dulled. The other servants were already rousing too before they looked around and eventually had their collective attention fall upon a very important detail. Namely, the very large speaker barely a meter from all of their heads. Cu's eyes slowly drifted over to Elizabeth. He watched almost in slow motion as the girl's mouth opened, the sound flying from her lips directly into the microphone in front of her. That's just typic. Farum gave the speaker another stomp of the foot, crushing what remained of it into a fine powder as he glared at it. He was acutely aware of someone saying something in his ear. Unfortunately, the constant ringing he was plagued with offset whatever they were attempting to say. Once he was sufficiently pleased that the speaker had been reduced to scrap, his eyes fell upon Elizabeth, the girl giving him an affronted glare as if she had somehow been wronged in this whole affair and hadn't almost killed half the stadium with her voice. Her arguments fell on deaf ears, both figuratively and literally in some cases, as some of the other servants wheeled away the remaining speaker and the singing platform. Ferrum slowly turned his head towards Storm. The drake was staring at him with its beak curved into a satisfied smile. "I'm sure you're very happy," Ferrum shouted back, his voice booming across the entire Colosseum. He was still unable to control his own volume, and causing the drake to wince at the depth of his tone. "But while I do like dragons, I do not enjoy their roars like you do." "Wah roars?" Elizabeth seethed, glaring at the god, who unfortunately hadn't heard her. "You uncivilized brute." Those screams were the cries of adoring fans. She gestured to the crowd. "See. My ears, my ears, my leg, Lancer got killed." Someone shouted out from the crowd in horror, pointing towards the spot directly in front of one of the speakers. The unfortunate quartet being at ground zero for Elizabeth's performance. "She's not human. See." Elizabeth puffed out her chest, crossing her arms with a smirk. "They can hardly believe their ears and just cannot accept my talent as human." She turned towards Pharaohs and shouted out, "Can you make a replacement speaker?" "Can I what?" the woman hollered back, rubbing her ears and giving the Lancer an baffled expression. "What did you say?" That gave the Lancer pause. She frowned before looking towards where she had sung. "Perhaps I turned the volume up too much," she muttered to herself as she rubbed her chin in thought. "Maybe that's the problem?" Ferrum spluttered in shock as the ringing in his ears died down long enough for him to hear that particular nugget of wisdom. The god spun around to gape at the small girl with his eyes wide. Do you actually think that's the only problem?" "Obviously not," Elizabeth scoffed in response. "While this venue is good, it lacks proper lighting as well." Ferrum stared at her in naked horror. The Rat King was still curled up in his throne, covering his ears and grimacing at the memory of the sound. "Sun-cursed beings. All," he cursed quietly. "That girl, she is of the race of banshees surely." "I'm inclined to agree," Mozart muttered, uncovering his ears and looking not that worse for wear. The man, having done his best to mitigate the damage to himself, looked down at the rat and cracked a faint smirk. "Not looking so good, are we?" "Do not mistake my condition for weakness, human," the rat growled back, glaring up at his vindictive smirk. "I can destroy thee just as easily in my present state." He gave a hum, turning to look to his left. Archon was lying face down, strewn over the railings with trickles of blood leaking out of the gap in the front of his helmet. "What happened to him?" he asked. Marie was similarly cringing as she approached and daintily removed the helmet from the knight's head, revealing the fact the white-haired man was bleeding from the ears and thoroughly unconscious. "Well, perhaps next time we should let him try and stop her." He gave an exaggerated sigh. "If only someone had warned UOWCH." He winced as Sanson struck him over the back of the head. Ritska could only stare up at the ceiling, blinking repeatedly as the ringing persisted in his ears. The master slowly sat up and looked around the room. It would appear that everyone else was in a similar state of discomfort. Even Ash was hunched over and clutching his ears with a pained grimace on his face as he staggered around the room. He suspected that Leonidas might have had it worse, the man having thrown his helmet off to better cover his ears and reveal his stern features and dark red hair to the world. Of course, the imposing image was offset by the man's expression of severe discomfort. Ritska looked around the room, the ringing in his ears slowly dying down as he climbed back to his feet, staggering slightly as he did so, before shakily making his way towards his chair and slumping back down into it. "Draconic blood, you said?" he asked aloud. knowing that Kiyohime was nearby. The berserker appeared in the corner of his vision with a concerned look on her face. "Are you all right, Anshin-sama?" she asked, stepping closer to him and giving him a once-over. The master waved his hand in affirmation as he straightened himself out. "Just a bit of ringing, but that's it," he replied to sat her concerns. "So, when she sings, she does." "Who in the bloody hell gave her a speaker system?" Olga growled out, glaring down the arena while still cupping her ears. "Why would you even have one of those in ancient Rome? Who was powering it?" Nero rubbed the inside of her ear and squinted at Olga. "What did you say, Pale Rose?" The director just gave a wordless growl in response. "And so, my Romans, after that," Nero trailed off, searching for the correct words to use. Memorable display. Murmurs and groans rippled through the crowds as people winced in memory of the singing. "We will now begin the first annual Nero Fest." Ritsuka's face scrunched up in confusion, looking at Mash and whispering to her, "This is going to be annual?" Mash shrugged in response. "I don't know, Senpei, that means Nero-san is planning another one, isn't she?" "I guess." Ritsuka paused, then looked towards the director. "I don't think she would let her though," he whispered out. Mash looked towards the white-haired woman and winced slightly. The director looked just as baffled by the announcement as the others before her expression shifted into one that just made it painfully clear that the prospect of there being another Nero Fest was so unlikely that there was more chance of Ash allowing Nero to bed the Firekeeper than there was of her allowing another festival. "Now we may begin the festivities," Nero exclaimed. The crowd just roared in approval. The thunderous applause rang out across the stadium as the Emperor took them all in with her expression brightening further. "We begin with a trial of swiftness." "I thought I was a goner for a second there." CU rolled his shoulder, stretching out his limbs and preparing to get himself into a starting position. "Good thing I survived, He chuckled. "Competition of swiftness, this was made for me." He paused at the voice, looking to his right to see another figure stood next to him at the starting line with crossed arms and a flat expression on her face. He stared up at the cat-like ears on the top of her head and the tail coming out from behind her. "You seem self-confident already." CU snorted, crossing his arms and raising an eyebrow. "Oh? You're gonna race me, are you, little miss?" The woman twitched at the name, "Little Miss." She repeated out, raising an eyebrow at him. HMPH. She turned on her heel and stared back across the track. "I suppose as long as you can remember not to chase your own tail, you might have some chance." CU blinked, then cracked a savage grin. "Oh yeah?" He chuckled, popping his neck from side to side as he got into a runner's position. "We'll just see about that, won't we, lady?" "I suppose we shall," Atalanta muttered out in response. While she didn't have much interest in these sort of games, she had at least come along for curiosity's sake. She was still referred to as the Swift Huntress, so there was every reason to prove how she earned that name. "And the final runner," Nero shouted out, a surprise guest but one with the swiftest to back up this claim. CU and Atalanta paused at the heavy panting coming off from their left side. The pair slowly turned their heads towards the final runner on the track. CU shot to his feet and promptly threw his hands up. "Is this some sort of jab at me or something?" he shouted out incredulously, looking around before he spotted a face in the stands. Archer stared back at him with a smirk. "Laugh it up, asshole." CU pointed at the man, then turned towards the final runner. "Really?" Sif merely raised an eyebrow at the Lancer before his attention shifted just past him to Atalanta. The wolf was more than all enough to look her in the eye. The wolf turned away from the pair and looked back down the track before tensing his body. CU wordlessly huffed before getting back into a running stance. Atalanta stared at the wolf for a few moments longer before she composed herself. "Go Ata-chan." She almost fell flat on her face when Artemis' cheery voice echoed out,
The woman snapped her head up towards the stands to see the white-haired woman waving a small flag while Orion just sat by her side giving her an expression close enough to pity as he could manage. "Go get them. I believe in you." She wasn't sure how she was supposed to respond to that in the least. "And run!" Nero shouted out, startling the runners and breaking them out of their odd trance and immediately into a run. Sif instantly broke into a mad sprint, swiftly followed by Cu and Atalanta right behind him. The crowd virtually exploded as the three runners utilized all their speed in keeping up with each other, Cu and Sif easily taking the lead. However, Atalanta's pace was more steady than the pair who preferred more explosive bursts. Sif's eyes snapped to his side as noticed Cu shoot forth with another burst of speed, coming up to equal pace with the wolf and giving it a side-eyed glance before he kicked off the ground again into another sprint. Sif huffed in response, coiling his legs back and shooting forwards in a blur of movement as he rocketed past the Lancer once again. Cu frowned as he watched Sif vanish past him. As he prepared another burst of speed, Atalanta shot past him. The Lancer clicked his tongue as he chased the two down. "So they look like they're having fun," Ritska commented as he looked down at them with a smile, watching as Sif, Cu and Atalanta sprinted around the track, right? Ash grunted in response, still staring down at them. "Is this to practice running away? Or running into battle?" Leonidas added on, "Or across battle. I admit, seeing the wolf move with such speed is astounding." "That's just expected though." Ash shrugged. "Great wolves are known for their speed, even the larger ones." "Really?" Ritska looked at Ash. "How fast was the fastest you saw?" Ash frowned in thought. Difficult to say, but whenever it ran, it produced an explosion of snow behind it, so it was fairly quick. He shrugged. "Whether or not it is slower than Sif is not something I can say." "So who do you think is going to win?" Leonidas hummed. "The wolf has speed and yet the feline woman, what is her name?" "Huh?" Ritska blinked. "Oh, that's Atalanta." Leonidas choked. The famed huntress and member of the Argonauts." The man practically squealed in delight. "She sailed the seas with the great hero Heracles." He looked back at the race with renewed interest. "Then I place my faith fully behind the huntress." "What are you doing?" "Giving my huntress a helping hand like a good goddess should." Artemis replied to Orion's question as she slowly took out a bone. "Because I am one who helps my followers." "You're shitting me," Orion gaped. "Really? What?" Artemis gave a beatific smile as she drew her arm back. "I'm just dropping something, not my fault. Dogs love bones." "This is dirty cheating and you know it." Orion shook his head. "Come on, you're better than this." Artemis paused for a few moments, then slowly nodded her head. "You're right, darling." She patted the bear on the back of the head. "I am?" he replied with a tone of clear surprise before he coughed into his paws. "I mean, of course I am." Sanora. "Yes, milady Artemis." Sanora looked towards her with a dutiful expression. Orion's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was going to happen. "Can you just throw this for me? Please." "Of course, milady." Sanora bowed her head, taking the bone from the goddess and pulling her arm back before she hurled the bone forwards with as much effort as she could muster. The bone swiftly soared through the sky in the direction of the track as Orion stared at it flabbergasted before he turned his shocked eyes onto the Lancer. "Why?" Sanora jolted, looking down at the bear. "Because milady Artemis said so." "You," Orion exhaled, shaking his head. "So much for good sportsmanship." Sanora paused, staring at the bear and then at Artemis. "This is a competition?" she squeaked. "I thought you said she was being harassed?" "You lied to her." "No," Artemis denied. "I just omitted." "That's the same thing as lying, not bad girly." Cu praised as they approached the final stretch of the run. The three runners were neck and neck at this point. "Good legs on you. Try and touch me and you'll see how much power they can produce."
Atalanta fired back as she sprinted alongside the lancer. Her lips quirked into a somewhat challenging smile. It seems perhaps tales of your speed were not embellished after all, considering you are indeed keeping pace with your namesake.
For the love of, see, you growled, pointing at Sif, he's a wolf. I was called a hound. There's not that much of a difference, but it's like me calling you kitty rather than lioness.
Try and call me either and see what happens. Atalanta shot back, but I shall be the one too. What the shit? Cu widened his eyes as something whistled through the air towards him. That a bone? Atalanta widened her eyes in equal fashion as Sif abruptly broke ranks with the two runners and leapt into the sky at the bone. His jaws snapped shut around the calcium-based treat, then he realized what the problem was at the same time as the other two runners. A collective wince reverberated through the crowd as the three runners collided with each other due to Sif jumping in front of the pair. The sprinters rolled across the ground in an awkward pile covered in dust and sand as they skipped past the finish line in a mess. By the time the dust settled, the three were lying flat on their backs with the notion of actually telling who had won the race being next to impossible. Nero's voice echoed out through the Colosseum? A draw? Nice. Orion flatly remarked. That's real nice. What an opening, EH. He rhetorically asked as she shook his head and pointed at Artemis. No more plans without at least asking for my opinion. Okay. And you? Yes? Sanora pointed at herself. Can I see comfort in your Embrak, darling? Never mind. Rat King's servant. Ruler strength. E. Endurance. E. Agility. A plus mana. B. Luck. A noble phantasm. B. The court of the king. B. Anti-army, max target. 50, max range. Summoning of his subjects to his will. While they are but summoned familiars of rats, he still treats them as his own. Royal Rat Authority. D. Anti-army, max target. 50, max range. Summons the authority of the Rat King. A giant rat dog who will fight and kill on his behalf. However, despite its size, the creature remains remarkably simple once it is understood. Royal Rat Vanguard. C. Anti-unit. Max target. 1, max range. The Vanguard who will attack with the court. They inflict great poison with their bite. However, that is it. The Vanguard can still be killed alone, which is why it relies on the court for protection. Class skills magic resistance. C. True name discernment. B. God's resolution. D. Territory creation. B. Personal skills. Golden rule. A tales of the Rat King's wealth existed for eons. He is a being who will forever remain rich, somehow. Charisma of the rodent. A+. He is a surprisingly honorable being, or perhaps unsurprisingly. Where he once saw all humans as vain and greedy, he now understands they are foolish at times. As such, he can inspire great confidence in his ability to govern and command, as he once did with all the underground. The statues of invaders. B++ a curse of petrification which lingers on all rats. They can cause this through their bites which will spread stone across the skin of attackers. Human observation. An innocent monster. See, the Rat King remains an honorable one, however his reputation and the reputation of his kin have been besmirched. Summoning. Thou art human and yet I can see perhaps a flicker of. 'Tis no concern for now. I am the Rat King and perhaps thou may yet prove worthy to be my servant. Dialogue 1. Human. Thou art a slothful one at times. However, we rates understand the value of self-comfort. However, do not dawdle for long. I shall brook no lethargy from one destined to serve me. Dialogue 2. The light of these rooms too much too bright, human. 'Tis not the sun's rays, but I find them equally cursing. Dialogue 3. Thou art my servant, human. Yet, I am a being of great honor. Serve me truly and I shall treat thee as if thee were a rat of my own. Dialogue 4. If you have Gilgamesh, I see the arrogance, O golden one. Humans who believe themselves greater than all others. Thy blood of the flames does not better thy kind above mine. A chieftain of humans thee may be, but thou art still a chieftain.
Dialogue 5. If you have Hans. I see thy tongue is sharp, human. Yet thy words ringeth true indeed. Thou art wise to see the faults of thy race, and yet, perhaps thou have become blinded by them. Perhaps not. Wisdom from a merchant of words, no matter their audience, is still to be taken.
Dialogue 6. If you have Artoria Pendragon, a chieftain, yet I see her honor, then we are well met indeed. Dialogue 7. If you have Patches, begone foul human. I shall tolerate your presence no longer, schemer and liar that thee are. Thou need not deny it. 'Tis an insult to all to claim otherwise. Dialogue 8. If you have Bearer of the Curse, I see my servant is here too. No, perhaps she is my equal now. She is a great service to her race. And she granted me my dream once again. Dialogue 9. If you have Yushiwakamaru, assassin, thy skill in the art of animal communing is wasted. I can speaketh the common tongue with thee. Dialogue 10. If you have Kintoki, there is one here who shines so brightly as if the cursed sun itself. Yet I see they art one of good nature, despite their boisterous attitude otherwise. Dialogue 11. If you have Baubhin Sith, enough of this baseness, foul spirit. Thou art the child of a chieftain, act with the dignity thy station permits or be gone from my sight. Dialogue 12. If you have Oberon Vortigern, I see thee for what thou art, base plotter and schemer fouler than any human could dare to imagine thyself being. Thou art of hollow mind and hollower spirit. I shall tolerate thee no longer, be gone. Dialogue 13. If you have Ilia, keep the young away from me. A rat's sludge is sacred to them. I will not have it removed so easily. However, they art of the innocent sort. I shall permit them stay, as long as thee doth not use them as fodder. Dialogue 14. If you have Daikokaten, my servant, I ask thee for a favor. Those who call themselves rats yet act little more than hooligans. Keep them from me.
Dialogue 15. After completing Avalon Lafai. My servant, I pity thee now more than ever. Thee hast been the victim of a scheme even we rats never suffered. My servant, I am glad thou art human. Thy race may be foolish and base at time, there are those who understand true honor even now.
Likes, did this question interest you greatly? We rats enjoy our darkness most dearly. For myself, I value honor amongst those who deal in words. Hates, I despise humans who plot and scheme. Thy kind are foolish and revert to thy base nature too often for my liking. Yet even if I am to be betrayed 100 times over, I shall never abandon a rat's honor. Wish for the Holy Grail, my servant, doth thee need ask. My wish is for a future where humans and rats can live and die together. I can glimpse it within this place, for me it is a beautiful sight. Bond Level 1, Rejoice, human. The right to serve me is now thine. Bond Level 2. Thy nature is from a different cloth cut. I see thee human, nay, my servant. Bond Level 3. My servant, we are well met indeed.
Bond Level 4. There was another human who served us long ago. She was one without notability like thyself, yet she rose to be a chieftain of great honor. She was my servant, then my equal. While her equal, thou art not. I see those same eyes that perceive true beauty.
Bond Level 5. My servant, thou proveth my dream remains strong indeed. I thank thee for thy service. Thou may be human, but thee serves with a true rat's honor. Birthday, thee should celebrate this day, my servant. I permit thee leave of my side for this day. During an event, a gathering under the cursed sun's rays, yet, we rats will not be dishonored in failing to attend.
First Ascension, thee serves me well, my servant. Thy service will not go unrewarded.
Second Ascension. Thy service remains as constant as ever, my servant. I thank thee. Third Ascension. My servant, thee has shown me great honor indeed. Fourth Ascension. I feel thy resolve and accept it, my servant. Thou art a human of great honor and virtue. I shall allow thee to serve me faithfully and in turn, reward thee thusly.